If you have $1 in your account, I'll give you my salary." The cruel laughter of manager Bruno Mendes echoed through the marble hall of the city's most exclusive bank. Before him, a 68-year-old woman stood motionless. Dorothy Williams wore a simple, worn dress that had seen far better days, a bright yellow weathered purse hanging from her arm, its fabric frayed and showing signs of years of use, and shoes that told stories of countless miles walked. "Listen up, everyone. Grandma here wants to transfer $1 million, Bruno shouted to his colleagues. The employees laughed. The VIP clients whispered with contempt. The security guard approached, ready to escort her out. Bruno was enjoying himself. Humiliating people was his favorite sport. But Dorothy didn't move, didn't lower her eyes, didn't run away embarrassed. Instead, she smiled, a serene smile that cut through the laughter like a silent blade. "Young Bruno, are you certain you want to make that bet?" Archie said, her voice calm. "Absolutely. You can bet your life on it, Grandma." Bruno laughed even louder. At that moment, neither Bruno nor anyone else in that agency had any idea they had just humiliated the most powerful woman in that bank. The storm Dorothy Williams was about to unleash would change everyone's life there forever. But first, let me tell you who Dorothy really was. I am the billionaire butler, and this story will change how you see people forever. It was exactly 9:15 on a Tuesday morning when Dorothy Williams pushed through the heavy glass doors of Premier National Bank. The contrast was immediate and brutal. The pristine marble floors, imported from Italy at a cost that could feed a small town for a year, reflected the crystal chandeliers hanging from 20-foot ceilings. The air was thick with the scent of expensive leather from the VIP waiting area, and the subtle fragrance of fresh orchids that were replaced daily by a team of professional florists. Dorothy's appearance created a ripple of discomfort that spread through the banking hall like a stone thrown into still water. Her weathered hands, marked by decades of honest work, clutched a simple cloth purse that had been her companion for over 15 years. The purse's fabric was faded but clean, patched in two places with care and precision that spoke of someone who understood the value of making things last. The other clients in the bank represented a different world entirely. Margaret Thornton, wife of the city's largest real estate developer, adjusted her Hermes scarf with practiced elegance while checking her Rolex Daytona. Her handbag cost more than most people earned in 6 months, and her perfectly manicured nails had been shaped at the city's most exclusive spa just that morning. Dr. Richard Pemberton, a prominent surgeon whose BMW was parked in the VIP section outside, wore a suit that had been custom-tailored in London. His medical practice catered exclusively to the wealthy elite, and his investment portfolio was managed by the bank's private wealth division. He glanced at Dorothy with the same clinical detachment he might show a particularly distasteful medical condition. James Morrison, owner of 3 luxury car dealerships, was conducting business via his latest iPhone while sipping imported mineral water from a crystal glass provided by the bank's concierge service. His watch collection alone was worth more than the average home in Dorothy's neighborhood, and he wore his wealth like armor against the world's lesser mortals. The bank employees were equally divided into their own hierarchy of judgment. Bruno Mendes, at 32, had clawed his way up from a modest background through a combination of ruthless ambition and calculated cruelty. His expensive suit was purchased with commission from selling high-fee investment products to clients who trusted his advice, and his Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble with the confidence of someone who had forgotten where he came from. Beside him, Sarah Chen, the senior teller, had learned to navigate the banking world by adopting the prejudices of her superiors. At 28, she had sacrificed her natural empathy for the armor of professional callousness, believing that showing kindness to the wrong sort of client would mark her as weak in the eyes of management. The security guard, Marcus Williams, ironically sharing a surname with Dorothy, though they were unrelated, had been trained to identify potential problems before they could disrupt the bank's refined atmosphere. His hand moved instinctively toward his radio as he observed Dorothy's approach, already composing the polite but firm request that would guide her toward the door. As Dorothy approached the main counter, conversations naturally paused. The soft classical music playing through the bank's premium sound system seemed to falter in the face of the tension building in the room. Even the air conditioning system, calibrated to maintain the perfect temperature for expensive suits and silk scarves, seemed inadequate against the chill that was beginning to form. "Good morning. I'd like to make a transfer from my account, please." Dorothy said, her voice carrying the particular cadence of someone who had grown up in rural farming communities, where words were chosen carefully and spoken with intention. Bruno's eyebrows rose in an expression of theatrical surprise. He glanced around the room, ensuring he had an audience for what he sensed would be an entertaining interaction. "A transfer? Well, well. And what amount were you hoping to transfer today?" And Bruno asked, his tone dripping with condescension that was carefully disguised as professional courtesy. $1 million, please. It needs to go to my investment account before 2 o'clock this afternoon," Dorothy replied matter-of-factly, as if she were discussing the weather or the price of groceries. The silence that followed was so complete that the gentle hum of the bank's climate control system became audible. Margaret Thornton's hand froze halfway to her scarf. "Doctor." Pemberton's phone call ended mid-sentence as he turned to stare. James Morrison's mineral water glass stopped halfway to his lips, suspended in disbelief. Bruno's face underwent a transformation that would have been comical if it weren't so cruel. Surprise gave way to amusement, amusement to contempt, and contempt to the particular brand of sadistic pleasure that comes from having an opportunity to publicly humiliate someone who cannot fight back. $1 million. Bruno repeated slowly, savoring each word like a fine wine. He turned to Sarah Chen with an expression of mock wonder. "Did you hear that, Sarah? Our guest here would like to transfer $1 million. Sarah, trained to follow Bruno's lead in all social situations, allowed a small smile to play across her lips. "That's quite a substantial amount, Mr. Mendez. Perhaps we should verify the account balance first?" "Oh, absolutely," Bruno replied. "We must follow proper procedures," dancing across his keyboard with exaggerated precision. "Let's see what we're working with here." The computer screen reflected in Bruno's glasses as he accessed Dorothy's account information. What he saw there should have stopped him cold, should have drained the color from his face and sent him scrambling to apologize. Instead, blinded by his own prejudices and the intoxicating feeling of having an audience, he focused only on what he expected to see. "Well, Mrs. Bruno paused theatrically. "Williams, is it? I see here that you do indeed have an account with us. Opened quite some time ago, I notice." He turned the monitor slightly, showing Sarah the screen while blocking Dorothy's view. Sarah's eyes widened slightly as she saw the account details, but Bruno's confident posture and knowing smile convinced her that he had everything under control. "Now, Mrs. Williams, transfers of this magnitude require extensive documentation and verification procedures. We have very strict policies about large transactions, particularly when they come from clients who don't regularly conduct business of this nature." Dorothy's expression remained calm, but something flickered in her eyes. It was not fear or embarrassment as Bruno expected, but rather the look of someone who had encountered this particular brand of institutional cruelty before and had learned to navigate it with patience born of experience. "I understand the need for proper procedures, young man. However, I've been banking here for over 20 years, and I've never had difficulty accessing my own funds before," Dorothy replied, her voice maintaining its even tone despite the growing audience. 20 years? Well, that may be, but policies change, Mrs. Williams. We have to protect both the bank and our clients from potential fraud or money laundering activities. Surely you understand the importance of these safeguards, Bruno said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone one might use with a confused child. Dr. Pemberton, who had been listening with growing amusement, decided to contribute to the spectacle. Young man, perhaps this lady would be more comfortable at one of the community credit unions. They might be better equipped to handle her particular banking needs. Margaret Thornton nodded in agreement, her jewelry catching the light as she moved. Exactly. There are several smaller institutions that specialize in, how shall I put this, more modest financial services. James Morrison, not to be outdone, added his own commentary. Some people just don't understand the level of sophistication required for serious banking. It's not their fault, really. They're simply out of their element. The cruelty was building like a symphony, each new voice adding to the chorus of mockery and disdain. Other clients who had initially tried to ignore the situation were now openly staring, some with amusement, others with the particular fascination that humans show when witnessing someone else's public humiliation. Bruno basked in the attention, feeling like the conductor of this orchestra of cruelty. This was better than he had hoped. Not only was he entertaining his colleagues and impressing the VIP clients, but he was also demonstrating the kind of firm boundary setting that management appreciated. Mrs. Williams, I think what these distinguished clients are trying to suggest is that perhaps you might be more comfortable doing your banking at an institution that's more aligned with your particular circumstances, Bruno said, his smile growing wider with each word. My particular circumstances, Dorothy repeated, her voice still calm but carrying a new quality that should have warned Bruno he was venturing into dangerous territory. Well, yes, Premier National Bank caters to a very specific clientele. Our services are designed for high-net-worth individuals who regularly conduct complex financial transactions. We have minimum balance requirements, fee structures, and service expectations that might not be the best fit for everyone. The insult hung in the air like a noxious cloud. Bruno had just told Dorothy, in front of a room full of witnesses, that she was too poor and too simple to deserve banking services at this institution. The cruelty was not subtle, not hidden behind corporate speak, but blatant and intentional. Sarah Chen shifted uncomfortably behind the counter. Something about the way Dorothy was standing, the calm dignity in her posture despite the assault on her character, was beginning to trouble her. But Bruno was her superior, and challenging him in front of clients would be career suicide. Marcus Williams, the security guard, had moved closer, ready to escort Dorothy out if the situation escalated. He had seen similar scenes play out before and knew that most people in Dorothy's position would either leave in shame or become angry and disruptive, requiring his intervention. But Dorothy Williams did neither. Instead, she opened her simple cloth purse and withdrew a worn leather wallet. From the wallet, she extracted a small, dog-eared business card and placed it gently on the marble counter in front of Bruno. Perhaps you should call this number before we proceed any further, young man. A B, she said quietly. Bruno glanced at the card dismissively. It was obviously homemade, printed on cheap cardstock with simple black text. The kind of thing someone might make on their home computer. He didn't even bother to read it carefully. Mrs. Williams, I don't think you understand the gravity of this situation. Making false claims about having substantial funds in your account could be considered fraud. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises before we involve law enforcement. The threat of police involvement sent a visible thrill through some of the watching clients. This was becoming even more entertaining than they had hoped. Margaret Thornton actually leaned forward in her chair, not wanting to miss any of the developing drama. But Dorothy simply smiled that same serene smile and gently pushed the business card closer to Bruno. I really do insist that you make that phone call, dear. I think you'll find it quite illuminating. There was something in her tone, something in the complete absence of fear or shame that finally penetrated Bruno's wall of arrogance. For the first time since the encounter began, he actually looked at the business card she had placed before him. The text was simple and devastating. Dorothy Williams, Chief Executive Officer, Williams Financial Group. Below it was a phone number, an email address, and the notation, Primary Shareholder, Premier National Bank. Bruno's hand trembled slightly as he picked up the card, reading it again to make sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. Williams Financial Group. He had heard that name before. It was one of the largest investment firms in the region, known for its conservative approach and substantial holdings in local businesses and real estate. This can't be real, Bruno whispered, his voice barely audible above the air conditioning. I assure you it is quite real, young man. Williams Financial Group has been the majority shareholder in Premier National Bank for the past 15 years. I believe we own approximately 63% of the voting shares, though my accountants could give you the exact figure if you require it. The words hit the room like a physical force. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Dr. Pemberton's phone slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers. Margaret Thornton's carefully composed expression crumbled into something approaching horror. James Morrison's expensive mineral water glass fell to the marble floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces that scattered across the pristine surface like fallen stars. But it was Bruno who bore the full weight of the revelation. In a matter of seconds, his entire understanding of the situation had been turned upside down. The poor, confused old woman he had been so deliciously humiliating was not only wealthy beyond his comprehension, but was essentially his ultimate boss. No, he said, shaking his head in denial. No, that's not possible. If you were Dorothy Williams of Williams Financial Group, why would you dress like, why would you look like? He couldn't finish the sentence because doing so would require him to acknowledge the depth of his own prejudice and cruelty. It would require him to admit that he had based his treatment of another human being entirely on superficial appearances. Like what, Bruno? Dorothy asked gently. Like someone who doesn't deserve respect? Like someone who doesn't matter? Like someone you can humiliate for the entertainment of others? Sarah Chen had gone completely pale behind the counter. She was frantically trying to access Dorothy's account information on her computer, her hands shaking as she typed. What she saw on the screen confirmed her worst fears. The account showed a balance that had so many zeros she had to count them twice to believe them. Mr. Mendes, I think you need to see this, Sarah whispered urgently, turning her monitor toward Bruno. Bruno looked at the screen and felt the blood drain from his face. Dorothy Williams's checking account alone contained more money than he would earn in several lifetimes. But more damning still were the transaction records that showed regular transfers in and out of amounts that dwarfed the bank's typical daily business. This still doesn't prove anything, Bruno said desperately, clinging to denial like a drowning man clinging to debris. Anyone could have printed that business card. Anyone could claim to be Dorothy Williams. Dorothy nodded understandingly, as if she had expected this response. From her purse, she withdrew an iPhone in a simple protective case. The phone was not the latest model, not adorned with expensive accessories, but it worked perfectly well for her needs. Sarah, dear, would you mind calling the number on that business card? Ask for my assistant, Jennifer. Tell her Dorothy is at the downtown branch and needs confirmation of her identity for some rather unprofessional employees. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial the number. The phone rang twice before a crisp professional voice answered. Williams Financial Group, Jennifer speaking. How may I assist you? Hello. This is Sarah Chen from Premier National Bank. I have a woman here claiming to be Dorothy Williams, and she asked me to call for identity confirmation. There was a pause, then Jennifer's voice took on a tone of concerned alertness. Is Mrs. Williams all right? Is there some kind of problem at the bank? Well, there's been a misunderstanding about a transaction request, and our manager wanted to verify. Please put Mrs. Williams on the phone immediately. Sarah handed the phone to Dorothy with trembling fingers. The entire bank had fallen silent, as if everyone was holding their breath. Hello, Jennifer. Yes, I'm fine, dear. There's just been a small communication issue here at the bank. Could you please explain to these nice people who I am and what authority I have regarding Premier National Bank? Dorothy handed the phone back to Sarah, whose face had gone from pale to completely white. Jennifer's voice was clear enough that several people nearby could hear both sides of the conversation. This is Jennifer Martinez, Executive Assistant to Dorothy Williams, Chief Executive Officer of Williams Financial Group. Mrs. Williams is indeed the majority shareholder of Premier National Bank, holding approximately 63.7% of all voting shares. She has full authority over all banking operations and personnel decisions. If there has been any discourtesy shown to Mrs. Williams, I need to know immediately so we can address it with bank management. Sarah looked around the room desperately, as if hoping someone would tell her this was all an elaborate prank. But the expressions on every face confirmed the horrible reality of the situation. I need to speak with my manager," Sarah whispered into the phone. "Your manager is speaking with the majority shareholder of the bank. If there's been a problem, Mrs. Williams has the authority to resolve it directly. May I speak with her again, please?" Dorothy took the phone back with the same calm demeanor she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. "Jennifer, I'll call you back shortly. Please prepare a summary of our current holdings in Premier National Bank and schedule a meeting with the Board of Directors for this afternoon. We need to discuss some policy changes regarding customer service training." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her purse, then looked around the room at the faces staring at her in various stages of shock, horror, and disbelief. "Now then, Bruno, about that transfer I requested." But Bruno Mendes was beyond speech. The magnitude of his error was crushing down on him like an avalanche. He had not only humiliated the bank's majority shareholder, but he had done so publicly, in front of witnesses, with such cruel enthusiasm that there could be no claiming it was a simple misunderstanding. Dr. Pemberton was the first to attempt damage control. "Mrs. Williams, I sincerely apologize for any confusion. I had no idea who you were, and I meant no disrespect whatsoever." Oh, his voice had the particular quality of someone who had just realized they had insulted someone with the power to destroy their life. Dr. Pemberton's practice depended heavily on loans from Premier National Bank, loans that could be called in at any time if the bank chose to do so. Margaret Thornton was frantically calculating the implications for her husband's real estate empire. Premier National Bank held the mortgages on half of their property developments, and if Dorothy Williams decided to make their lives difficult, the consequences could be catastrophic. James Morrison had gone completely silent, his mind racing through every loan, every line of credit, every financial relationship his businesses had with the bank. His entire empire could be toppled by a single decision from the woman he had just mocked as unsophisticated. But it was the bank employees who faced the most immediate consequences. Sarah Chen was already mentally updating her resume, knowing that her participation in the humiliation would likely cost her job. Marcus Williams, the security guard, was wondering if his pension would be affected by his association with the incident. And Bruno Mendes was experiencing something approaching a complete mental breakdown. His entire sense of self had been built on his position at the bank, his ability to intimidate and control those he perceived as beneath him. To discover that he had just committed career suicide by attacking the one person with the power to destroy him was more than his psyche could handle. "Mrs. Williams, I didn't know. If I had known who you were, I never would have." Dorothy held up a gentle hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "That's exactly the problem, isn't it, Bruno? You treated me badly because you thought I was powerless to fight back. You enjoyed humiliating someone you believed couldn't hurt you. But the real question is this: how many other people have you treated this way? How many other customers have you mocked and dismissed because they didn't meet your standards of what a proper bank client should look like?" The question hung in the air like an indictment, because everyone in that room knew the answer. Bruno's behavior today wasn't an aberration, it was a pattern. He had built his reputation on being tough with difficult customers, and management had rewarded him for it because it kept the VIP clients happy and maintained the bank's exclusive atmosphere. "Mrs. Williams, if you'll allow me to explain our customer service policies," Bruno began desperately. "Oh, I'm quite familiar with your customer service policies, Bruno. I've been receiving complaint letters for months from customers who felt mistreated by this branch. elderly customers who were made to feel unwelcome, small business owners who were treated with contempt, working families who were mocked for not having enough money to meet your arbitrary standards of respect. She pulled out her phone again and scrolled through her emails. Mrs. Henderson, age 74, wrote to complain that she was laughed at when she tried to make a withdrawal from her Social Security account. Mr. Garcia, who owns a small auto repair shop, was told he should find a bank more suited to his type of business when he applied for a small business loan. The Davidson family was openly mocked by staff when they came in to discuss mortgage modification options after Mr. Davidson lost his job. Each name was like a hammer blow to Bruno's remaining composure. These were real people, real incidents, and the fact that Dorothy had detailed knowledge of them meant she had been investigating the branch's customer service practices for some time. I came here today not just to conduct personal business, but to see firsthand how my employees treat customers who don't fit your narrow definition of worthy. What I've witnessed today exceeds even my worst expectations. Sarah Chen finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Mrs. Williams, I want you to know that not all of us behave this way. Some of us just follow the lead of our supervisors. Dorothy turned her attention to Sarah with the same gentle but penetrating gaze. And that's precisely the problem, isn't it, dear? You've all become so focused on impressing the wrong people that you've forgotten who you're actually here to serve. A bank exists to serve its customers, all of its customers, not to provide entertainment for the wealthy by humiliating the poor. Marcus Williams, the security guard, stepped forward hesitantly. Ma'am, I want to apologize for my role in this. I was just following what I thought were proper security procedures. Were you, Marcus? Was it proper security procedure to prepare to forcibly remove a customer who was conducting legitimate business? Or were you responding to social cues about what kind of person deserves to be here? The question was asked without anger, but it cut deep nonetheless. Marcus realized that his actions had been based entirely on Dorothy's appearance, not on any actual security threat she posed. Dr. Pemberton made another attempt at salvaging his position. Mrs. Williams, I hope you understand that my comments were not meant personally. I was simply trying to be helpful in suggesting alternative banking options that might be more convenient for you. Dorothy's smile was sad rather than angry. Dr. Pemberton, the truth is that you weren't trying to be helpful at all. You were trying to get rid of someone whose presence made you uncomfortable. Someone who reminded you that not everyone in this world has had your advantages. The doctor's face flushed red as the accuracy of her assessment hit home. He had indeed been uncomfortable with Dorothy's presence, but not for any rational reason. Her simple clothing and humble demeanor had violated his sense of what the bank's atmosphere should be, and he had wanted her removed to restore his own comfort. Margaret Thornton made her own attempt at damage control. Mrs. Williams, I think there may have been a misunderstanding. I wasn't trying to exclude you from anything. I was simply making conversation about different banking options. Mrs. Thornton, you referred to me as that type of person and suggested that I didn't belong here. You made those comments not to be helpful, but to establish your own superiority in the eyes of others. You used my supposed poverty as a way to highlight your own wealth and status. Margaret's carefully constructed social facade crumbled under the weight of having her motivations so clearly exposed. She had indeed been trying to establish social dominance, using Dorothy as a convenient target for demonstrating her own position in the hierarchy. James Morrison had remained silent, hoping to avoid attention, but Dorothy's gaze found him as well. And you, Mr. Morrison, spoke about sophistication and people being out of their element. What you were really saying is that you believe financial status determines human worth, that someone with less money is inherently less deserving of respect. The businessman's expensive watch felt heavy on his wrist as he realized how perfectly Dorothy had dissected his worldview. He had indeed been operating under the assumption that wealth equaled worth, and that poor people deserved whatever treatment they received, but it was Bruno who remained the primary focus of Dorothy's attention. He was the bank employee, the one whose behavior reflected directly on the institution she owned. "Bruno, you've spent the last 20 minutes entertaining these people by humiliating someone you thought was defenseless. You've violated every principle of customer service, human decency, and professional conduct. But more than that, you've revealed something ugly about your character that training and policy changes can't fix." Bruno's face was now completely drained of color. He understood that his career was over, but more than that, he was beginning to comprehend the full scope of his moral failure. "Mrs. Williams, I can change. I can learn from this. Please give me another chance to prove that I can be better." Dorothy studied his face carefully, looking for genuine remorse beneath the desperation. "Bruno, the question isn't whether you can behave properly when you know someone has power over you. The question is whether you can treat all people with dignity, regardless of their apparent status or ability to affect your life. Based on what I've seen today, I don't believe you can." She turned to address the room at large. This bank was founded on the principle that financial services should be available to all members of our community. Somewhere along the way, it became an exclusive club designed to make wealthy people feel superior by contrasting their position with those less fortunate. That ends today. Sarah Chen, desperate to salvage her position, spoke up again. "Mrs. Williams, what can we do to make this right? How can we change the culture here?" Dorothy considered the question carefully before responding. "The culture here is a reflection of the values demonstrated by leadership. When managers like Bruno are rewarded for cruel behavior toward customers they perceive as unimportant, that behavior becomes institutionalized. When employees like you, Sarah, follow that lead without question, it becomes normalized." She paused, looking around the room at all the faces staring at her with various combinations of fear, shame, and desperate hope. Real change requires more than policy adjustments. It requires a fundamental shift in how we view our purpose and our responsibilities to the community we serve. Dr. Pemberton made one more attempt to minimize his involvement. "Mrs. Williams, surely you understand that this was an unusual situation. Normally, the bank's customer service is exemplary." "Is it, Dr. Pemberton? Because the complaint letters I've been receiving suggest otherwise." "What happened here today isn't an aberration. It's a concentrated example of attitudes that have been building for years." Margaret Thornton, realizing that continuing to make excuses would only make things worse, decided to try a different approach. "Mrs. Williams, what would you like to see happen going forward? How can we contribute to making things better?" It was the first question anyone had asked that focused on solutions rather than self-preservation, and Dorothy appreciated the shift in tone. "That's a much better question, Mrs. Thornton. What I'd like to see is a banking environment where every customer is treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their appearance, their account balance, or their social status. I'd like to see employees who take pride in serving their community rather than in excluding people from it." She turned back to Bruno, who had been standing in stunned silence. "As for you, Bruno, your employment with Premier National Bank is terminated, effective immediately. Your behavior today demonstrated such a profound lack of judgment and basic human decency that I cannot trust you to represent this institution in any capacity." The words hit Bruno like a physical blow. He had known it was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that his racing thoughts had not been able to process. "Mrs. Williams, please. I have a mortgage, car payments, family obligations. This job is everything to me. And yet you were so cavalier about potentially destroying the dignity and financial security of someone you thought couldn't fight back. Did you consider Mrs. Henderson's fixed income when you mocked her Social Security withdrawal? Did you think about Mr. Garcia's family when you told him to find another bank?" Bruno's shoulders sagged as he realized that his pleas for mercy were falling on deaf ears. Not because Dorothy was cruel, but because he had forfeited any claim to consideration through his own actions. Sarah Chen watched Bruno's termination with growing dread, knowing that her own job was likely in jeopardy as well. Mrs. Williams, I know I participated in what happened today, and I take full responsibility for my part. If you decide to terminate my employment as well, I understand, but I want you to know that I've learned something important about myself today, and it's not something I like. Dorothy studied Sarah's face, looking for sincerity behind the professional mask. What have you learned, Sarah? I've learned that I've been measuring my own worth by my ability to exclude others. I've been taking pride in being part of an exclusive institution, but what I was really proud of was being on the inside of something that kept other people out. That's not the person I want to be. The admission was clearly difficult for Sarah to make, but it had the ring of genuine self-reflection rather than calculated damage control. Sarah, recognition of a problem is the first step towards solving it. Your employment will continue, but you'll be participating in extensive customer service retraining, and your performance will be closely monitored. Any future incidents of discriminatory behavior will result in immediate termination. Sarah nodded gratefully, understanding that she was being given a second chance that she probably didn't deserve. Marcus Williams, the security guard, stepped forward again. Mrs. Williams, I'd like to request the same opportunity that you're giving Sarah. I realize now that I've been enforcing unofficial policies based on appearance and social status rather than actual security concerns. I'd like to learn how to do my job properly. Dorothy nodded approvingly. Marcus, your willingness to acknowledge your mistakes and request training rather than making excuses speaks well of your character. You'll also be participating in retraining, with a focus on understanding the difference between legitimate security concerns and discriminatory profiling. The bank's other customers had been watching this exchange with fascination and growing discomfort. They were beginning to realize that their own behavior was also under scrutiny. Dr. Pemberton cleared his throat nervously. Mrs. Williams, I hope you'll accept my sincere apology for my comments today. They were inappropriate and judgmental, and they don't reflect my true values. Dr. Pemberton, I appreciate your apology, but I'm more interested in whether your behavior will change going forward. Apologies are easy to give when consequences are at stake. The real test will be how you treat the next person you encounter who doesn't meet your preconceptions about who belongs where. Margaret Thornton nodded in agreement. Mrs. Williams, you're absolutely right. I've been operating under some very ugly assumptions about people, and today has forced me to confront them. I can't promise I'll change overnight, but I can promise I'll try to be more aware of my prejudices and work to overcome them. James Morrison, who had been silent since Dorothy's identity was revealed, finally spoke up. Mrs. Williams, I don't have any excuses for my behavior. I said things that were cruel and elitist, and I said them because I thought there would be no consequences. The fact that there are consequences now doesn't change the ugliness of what I revealed about myself. Dorothy appreciated his honesty, even as she noted the self-serving nature of his admission. Mr. Morrison, at least you're being honest about your motivations. That's more than I can say for everyone here today. She looked around the room one more time, taking in the faces of everyone who had participated in or witnessed the events of the morning. What happened here today was not an isolated incident, and it wasn't caused by one person's bad behavior. It was the result of a culture that has developed over time, a culture that prioritizes the comfort of the wealthy over the dignity of everyone else. She paused to let that sink in before continuing. But culture can be changed. It requires leadership that models the right values, employees who are willing to examine their own biases, and customers who hold themselves and others accountable for treating all people with respect. Dorothy turned to Sarah, who had been listening intently to everything being said. Sarah, you're now the acting manager of this branch. Your first responsibility is to review every customer service policy and procedure to ensure they don't contain hidden barriers that discriminate against people based on appearance, age, race, or economic status. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. She'd expected to keep her job, but a promotion was beyond anything she had hoped for. Mrs. Williams, I don't know if I'm qualified for that responsibility. Qualification isn't just about technical knowledge, Sarah. It's about judgment, character, and commitment to doing what's right even when it's difficult. Your willingness to acknowledge your mistakes and learn from them suggests you have the potential to grow into the role. Dorothy then addressed Marcus Williams. Marcus, I'm also promoting you to head of security for this branch. Your job will be to ensure that all customers feel safe and welcome here, regardless of their background or circumstances. Marcus straightened his shoulders, understanding that he was being given not just a promotion, but a chance at redemption. Mrs. Williams, I won't let you down. I promise you that. I'm counting on that, Marcus. But remember, this isn't about not letting me down. It's about not letting down the next elderly customer who needs help, the next immigrant family trying to open their first account, the next young person applying for their first loan. Dorothy then turned her attention to the VIP customers who had participated in the morning's cruelty. Dr. Pemberton, Mrs. Thornton, Mr. Morrison, I won't be taking any direct action regarding your accounts based on today's incident. However, I want you to understand that your behavior reflects not just on yourselves, but on the community we all share. A bank is a public trust, not a private club for excluding people you deem unworthy. Dr. Pemberton nodded soberly. Mrs. Williams, I understand. And I want you to know that this experience has made me examine some attitudes I didn't even realize I held. That's all I can ask, Dr. Pemberton. Self-examination is the beginning of wisdom. Stepped forward, her earlier arrogance completely replaced by genuine remorse. Mrs. Williams, is there anything I can do to help implement the changes you're planning? I feel terrible about my behavior, and I'd like to contribute to making things better if possible. Dorothy studied Margaret's face carefully, looking for sincerity beneath the social polish. Mrs. Thornton, if you're genuinely interested in helping, I could use volunteers for the financial literacy program I'm planning to establish for low-income families in our community. It would involve working directly with people who have very different backgrounds from your own. Margaret's first instinct was to recoil from the idea of working with poor people, but she caught herself and recognized the test inherent in Dorothy's offer. I would be honored to help with that program, Mrs. Williams. I think I have a lot to learn about people whose experiences are different from mine. James Morrison, who had been observing this exchange, found the courage to speak up. Mrs. Williams, I'd also like to volunteer for whatever community programs you're planning. I realize I have some serious blind spots when it comes to understanding how privilege affects the way I see other people. Dorothy nodded approvingly. I appreciate that offer, Mr. Morrison. Understanding privilege is indeed the first step toward using it responsibly. She then turned back to Bruno, who had been standing in stunned silence throughout these exchanges. Bruno, I want you to understand that your termination isn't just about punishment, it's about accountability. When someone in a position of authority abuses that authority to humiliate vulnerable people, there have to be consequences. Otherwise, the behavior continues and spreads. Bruno's voice was barely above a whisper when he responded. I understand, Mrs. Williams. I just hope that someday I can prove that I've learned from this and become a better person. That's up to you, Bruno. Character isn't measured by how you behave when you have something to gain or lose. It's measured by how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. Dorothy looked around the room one final time, taking in the faces of everyone who had been transformed by the morning's events. Before I leave, I want to share something with all of you. 35 years ago, I was exactly where many of you are now. I was a young woman working in a bank, and I participated in the humiliation of an elderly customer who came in wearing work clothes and speaking with a heavy accent. I joined in the laughter when my supervisor mocked his broken English and suggested he needed a translator to understand basic banking. The room was completely silent as Dorothy continued her story. That man was a Holocaust survivor who had built a successful manufacturing business despite having lost everything, including most of his family, during the war. When I discovered who he was and what he had endured, I was devastated by my own cruelty. But he taught me something that changed my life forever. She paused, letting the weight of her revelation settle over the room. He told me that the greatest tragedy wasn't what had been done to him, but what I had done to myself by allowing circumstances to turn me into someone who could participate in the dehumanization of another person. He said that every time we choose cruelty over kindness, we diminish our own humanity. Dr. Pemberton wiped his eyes, clearly moved by the story. What happened to him? The Holocaust survivor. He became my mentor, my business partner, and eventually like a father to me. He taught me everything I know about business, but more importantly, he taught me everything I know about treating people with dignity. When he died 15 years ago, he left me his entire estate, including his majority stake in this bank. Margaret Thornton gasped softly. So this bank became yours because of an act of kindness from someone you had initially treated badly. That's exactly right, Mrs. Thornton. And he specifically asked me to use whatever power I inherited to ensure that no customer would ever again experience the kind of humiliation he had endured here. The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. Dorothy had inherited her position as the bank's majority shareholder directly as a result of someone's kindness to her after she had participated in their humiliation. Now she was using that inherited power to prevent others from experiencing the same treatment. Sarah Chen spoke up thoughtfully. Mrs. Williams, is that why you came in today dressed as you did? Were you testing us the same way your mentor tested you? Dorothy smiled sadly. Not exactly, Sarah. I dress this way because these are my clothes. I live on a small farm outside town. I raise chickens and grow vegetables, and I prefer simple things to expensive ones. The difference is that your mentor chose to forgive my prejudice and teach me to be better. Today I discovered that some people here never learned that lesson. James Morrison shook his head in amazement. So you've been wealthy for decades, but you've chosen to live simply. Wealth isn't about how much money you have, Mr. Morrison. It's about having enough to meet your needs and help others meet theirs. I have more money than I could spend in several lifetimes, but that doesn't mean I need to spend it on things that don't matter to me. Marcus Williams asked a question that had been bothering him. Mrs. Williams, how many other banks do you visit like this, testing to see how customers are treated? More than you might think, Marcus. And unfortunately, what I found here today isn't unique. There's something about financial institutions that seems to bring out the worst in people's attitudes toward class and social status. Dr. Pemberton looked troubled. Mrs. Williams, do you think this problem extends beyond banks? Are we all guilty of these kinds of judgments in other areas of our lives? That's a question you'll have to answer for yourself, Dr. Pemberton. But I will say that today's incident didn't happen in a vacuum. The attitudes displayed here are reflections of broader social prejudices that exist throughout our community. Margaret Thornton nodded slowly. You're right. I can think of times when I've made similar judgments at the country club, at charity events, even at church. It's like we've all been trained to see people as categories rather than individuals. The good news, Mrs. Thornton, is that recognition is the first step toward change. The bad news is that change requires consistent effort and uncomfortable self-examination. Dorothy walked over to the counter where Bruno still stood, looking lost and defeated. Bruno, I want to give you something before you leave. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, worn business card. It was different from the one she had shown him earlier. This is the card of a friend of mine who runs a non-profit organization that helps people transition back into the workforce after they've made serious mistakes. He specializes in helping people who need to rebuild not just their careers, but their character. Bruno took the card with trembling hands. Why would you help me after what I did to you? Because 35 years ago, someone helped me when I didn't deserve it, and that kindness changed my life. I'm not promising you a job or a recommendation, but I'm giving you a chance to begin the hard work of becoming a better person." Bruno's eyes filled with tears as he realized that even in his disgrace, he was being shown more kindness than he had ever shown to others. "Mrs. Williams, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me, Bruno. Prove that this gift isn't wasted. Learn from this experience and use it to help other people avoid making the same mistakes you made." Dorothy then addressed the room at large. "I'm going to be implementing several changes at this branch over the next few months. There will be mandatory customer service training for all employees, focusing specifically on unconscious bias and respectful treatment of all customers, regardless of their apparent social or economic status." Sarah Chen raised her hand tentatively. "Mrs. Williams, what kind of training are you envisioning?" "The training will include role-playing exercises where employees will experience what it's like to be judged and dismissed based on their appearance. It will also include education about the diverse backgrounds and circumstances of our customer base and specific protocols for ensuring that every interaction reflects respect and professionalism." Marcus Williams looked concerned. "Mrs. Williams, will the training address security concerns?" "I want to make sure I can still do my job effectively while also being more welcoming to all customers." "Absolutely, Marcus. Part of the training will help you distinguish between legitimate security concerns and prejudicial assumptions. For example, someone's clothing style or accent should never be considered a security risk, but actual threatening behavior or attempts to circumvent security procedures should always be addressed." Dr. Pemberton raised a question that had been troubling him. "Mrs. Williams, how will you measure the success of these changes? How will you know if the culture really shifts?" "That's an excellent question, Dr. Pemberton. I'll be implementing a customer feedback system that allows people to report both positive and negative experiences anonymously. I'll also be conducting regular unannounced visits, sometimes in disguise like today, to observe interactions firsthand." Margaret Thornton looked worried. "Will you be visiting other businesses in the community the same way?" Dorothy smiled mysteriously. "Let's just say that this bank isn't the only institution in town that could benefit from some cultural examination." The implications of her statement were clear to everyone in the room. If Dorothy was willing to test her own bank so dramatically, she was likely conducting similar evaluations of other businesses and organizations throughout the community. James Morrison suddenly looked very pale as he realized that his own dealerships might be subjected to similar testing. "Mrs. Williams, if you were to visit other businesses, would you give them the same opportunity for improvement that you're giving this bank?" "That would depend entirely on how they respond when confronted with their failures, Mr. Morrison. Today, I've seen both encouraging and discouraging responses from the people in this room." Dorothy walked over to the window and looked out at the busy street beyond. "You know what saddens me most about today isn't the individual cruelty I witnessed. It's the systemic nature of it. Everyone here knew exactly what role to play in the humiliation of someone they perceived as vulnerable. That suggests this behavior is deeply ingrained and widely accepted." Sarah Chen spoke up thoughtfully. "Mrs. Williams, how do we change something that's so systemic? It feels like such a big problem. Change happens one interaction at a time, Sarah. Every time someone chooses kindness over cruelty, respect over dismissal, it creates a ripple effect. The goal isn't to transform society overnight, but to create pockets of genuine decency that can expand over time." Marcus Williams nodded. "So our job is to make this bank one of those pockets of decency." "Exactly, Marcus. And if we do it right, customers will notice the difference and begin to expect the same level of respect everywhere they go. That creates pressure on other businesses to improve their own customer service." Dr. Pemberton looked thoughtful. "Mrs. Williams, do you think today's experience will have a lasting impact on the people who witnessed it?" "That depends on whether they choose to learn from it or forget about it, Dr. Pemberton. Shame is a powerful emotion, but it doesn't automatically lead to change. Change requires a conscious decision to do better, followed by consistent effort to honor that decision. Margaret Thornton raised her hand tentatively. Mrs. Williams, you mentioned earlier that you own other businesses besides this bank. Do they all operate under the same principles you're describing? They do, Mrs. Thornton. And I can tell you that treating all customers with respect isn't just the right thing to do morally, it's also good business. When people feel valued and respected, they become loyal customers who recommend your services to others. James Morrison looked skeptical, but surely there must be some loss of exclusivity. Some customers prefer establishments that cater to a particular social class. Dorothy's expression grew stern. Mr. Morrison, customers who prefer exclusivity based on their ability to exclude others are exactly the kind of customers I'm not interested in serving. True luxury is about quality of service, not about making other people feel inferior. The rebuke was gentle but firm, and James Morrison realized he was still thinking in the same elitist terms that had gotten him into trouble earlier. I apologize, Mrs. Williams. I'm still learning to recognize these attitudes in myself. Recognition is the first step, Mr. Morrison, but it has to be followed by action. Dorothy looked at her watch and realized that several hours had passed since she had first entered the bank. The morning that had begun with a simple transfer request had transformed into something much more significant. I think it's time for me to complete the transaction that brought me here in the first place. Sarah, would you please process that $1 million transfer I requested? Sarah moved quickly to her computer, her hands still slightly shaky from the morning's events. Of course, Mrs. Williams. To which account would you like the funds transferred? Please transfer it to the account for the Williams Community Foundation. We're funding a new financial literacy program for low-income families, and the money needs to be available for the first workshop next week. The irony was perfect. The $1 million that Bruno had mocked Dorothy for claiming to have was being donated to help exactly the kind of people he had spent his career dismissing and mistreating. As Sarah processed the transfer, the computer screen showed the transaction in real time. $1 million moving from Dorothy's personal account to a foundation dedicated to helping disadvantaged families improve their financial situation. Dr. Pemberton watched the screen in amazement. Mrs. Williams, you're giving away $1 million to help people you've never met? Dr. Pemberton, the money was never really mine to begin with. I'm just a temporary steward of resources that came to me through luck and the kindness of others. The only way to honor that gift is to use it to help other people. Margaret Thornton was clearly moved by this display of generosity. Mrs. Williams, is there anything the rest of us can do to support this foundation? Your time would be more valuable than your money, Mrs. Thornton. The foundation always needs volunteers to help with financial education workshops, and volunteers who can relate to different communities and backgrounds. James Morrison raised his hand tentatively. Mrs. Williams, I'd also like to volunteer. I think working with people who are struggling financially might help me gain some perspective on my own privileges. Dorothy nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of perspective that makes someone a good volunteer, Mr. Morrison. When you understand your own advantages, you can use them to help others rather than to feel superior to them. The transfer completed successfully, and Sarah printed out a confirmation receipt. Mrs. Williams, the transfer has been completed. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Actually, there is one more thing, Sarah. I'd like you to pull up the accounts for Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Garcia, and the Davidson family, the customers I mentioned earlier who filed complaints about their treatment here. Sarah's fingers flew over the keyboard as she accessed the accounts Dorothy had mentioned. I have their information, Mrs. Williams. What would you like me to do? I want you to reverse any fees they were charged for the interactions they complained about, and I want you to send them personalized apology letters explaining that their treatment was unacceptable and that steps have been taken to ensure it doesn't happen again. Sarah nodded eagerly. I'll take care of that right away, Mrs. Williams. And Sarah, I want you to include gift cards for local restaurants in each apology letter. People who were mistreated here deserve more than just words." The gesture was simple but powerful. Dorothy was using her position not just to prevent future mistreatment, but to actively make amends for past injuries. Marcus Williams watched this interaction with growing understanding. "Mrs. Williams, you're not just changing policies going forward. You're trying to heal the damage that's already been done." "That's exactly right, Marcus. Real leadership means taking responsibility for past failures as well as preventing future ones." Dorothy gathered her simple purse and prepared to leave, but before she could reach the door, Bruno stepped forward one last time. "Mrs. Williams, before you go, I need to ask you something. How did you stay so calm throughout this entire ordeal? How did you maintain your dignity when everyone was trying to strip it away?" Dorothy paused, considering the question carefully before answering. "Bruno, dignity isn't something other people can take away from you. It's something you either have or you don't, based on how you see yourself and how you treat others. I knew who I was when I walked in here this morning, and nothing that happened here could change that." She looked around the room one final time. "The real question is whether each of you will use this experience to build your own dignity by treating others with the respect every human being deserves." Dr. Pemberton stood up as Dorothy prepared to leave. "Mrs. Williams, thank you for the lesson you've taught us today. I hope we prove worthy of it." Dr. Pemberton, proving worthy isn't a one-time event. It's a daily choice. Make that choice and keep making it, and you'll become the person you want to be. Margaret Thornton also rose from her chair. "Mrs. Williams, I want you to know that this experience has changed how I see things. I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I can promise I'll try to be better. That's all any of us can do, Mrs. Thornton. Try to be better today than we were yesterday." James Morrison stood as well. "Mrs. Williams, I feel like I need to apologize not just for today, but for years of thinking and behaving in ways that hurt other people. I don't know how to make up for that." "You make up for it by changing how you think and behave going forward, Mr. Morrison. The past can't be changed, but the future is still unwritten." Dorothy walked toward the door, but turned back one last time to address Sarah and Marcus. "Sarah, Marcus, remember that leadership isn't about having authority over other people. It's about using whatever influence you have to make life better for everyone around you. I'm counting on both of you to set the tone for the new culture we're building here." Sarah straightened her shoulders with newfound confidence. "We won't let you down, Mrs. Williams. And more importantly, we won't let down the customers who trust us to serve them well." Marcus nodded in agreement. "Mrs. Williams, I promise that every person who walks through that door will be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of how they look or what they're wearing." Dorothy smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she had shown since entering the bank that morning. "That's all I can ask for. Remember, you're not just employees of Premier National Bank. You're ambassadors for the kind of community we want to live in." As Dorothy pushed through the glass doors and stepped back onto the busy sidewalk, she could feel the eyes of everyone in the bank watching her leave. She had accomplished more than just a financial transaction that morning. She had planted seeds of change that would grow and spread throughout the community in ways she might never fully know. Behind her, the bank fell into thoughtful silence as everyone processed what they had experienced. Lives had been changed, perspectives had been shifted, and a new chapter had begun in the story of how people treat each other when they think no one important is watching. But Dorothy Williams knew that someone important is always watching. Sometimes it's the CEO of the company. Sometimes it's a customer who will tell their friends about their experience. And sometimes it's the person in the mirror who has to live with the consequences of their choices. The true test of the day's lessons wouldn't come in grand gestures or dramatic moments. It would come in the countless small interactions that would follow in the days, weeks, and months ahead. It would come when an elderly customer needed help with a complicated form, when a young family was struggling to qualify for their first loan, when someone who didn't speak perfect English needed patient assistance with their banking needs. Dorothy Williams had given everyone in that bank the tools they needed to pass those tests. Whether they chose to use those tools would be up to them. But as she walked down the sidewalk toward her modest pickup truck, Dorothy allowed herself a small smile. She had seen genuine remorse in some faces, real determination to change in others. And she had seen the spark of understanding that comes when people realize they have the power to make the world a little bit better, one interaction at a time. The story of what happened at Premier National Bank that day would spread throughout the community, as such stories always do. Some people would dismiss it as an anomaly, an isolated incident with no broader meaning. Others would see it as a wake-up call, a reminder that how we treat each other matters more than what we wear or how much money we have. And a few people, a precious few, would see it as an invitation to examine their own hearts and choose to become the kind of person who makes the world a more decent place for everyone. Those few people would be Dorothy Williams's true legacy, more valuable than any amount of money she could ever give away. Because kindness, once learned and practiced, spreads in ways that wealth alone never can. The transformation of Premier National Bank was just beginning, but it was already clear that nothing would ever be quite the same. And that, Dorothy thought, as she drove her simple truck through the streets of a community she was quietly helping to heal, was exactly as it should be. 6 months later, Premier National Bank had become known throughout the region for its exceptional customer service and welcoming atmosphere. Sarah Chen had exceeded all expectations as branch manager, implementing innovative programs that served customers from all walks of life with equal respect and professionalism. Marcus Williams had revolutionized the bank's security approach, focusing on creating an environment where everyone felt safe and valued rather than excluded and judged. He had become a model for other security professionals throughout the banking industry. The community programs that Dorothy had established were thriving, with volunteers like Margaret Thornton and James Morrison discovering that their greatest satisfaction came not from excluding others, but from helping them succeed. Dr. Pemberton had begun offering free financial counseling to patients who were struggling with medical debt, using his position to help rather than judge. And Bruno Mendes, after months of difficult self-examination and community service, had found work with the non-profit organization Dorothy had recommended. He was slowly rebuilding his life and his character, one act of service at a time. But perhaps the most important change was the one that couldn't be measured in statistics or documented in reports. It was the change in how people throughout the community began to see each other. The story of Dorothy Williams had reminded them that everyone has a story, everyone has dignity, and everyone deserves to be treated with respect. It was a simple lesson, but one that had the power to transform not just a bank, but an entire way of life. And it all began with a 70-year-old woman in a faded dress who had the courage to stand up to cruelty and the wisdom to respond with grace. That, the billionaire butler reflected, is the true measure of wealth. Not what you have, but what you do with it. Not how high you can climb, but how many people you can lift up as you go. And not how much power you can accumulate, but how you use that power to make the world a more decent place for everyone. The story of Dorothy Williams reminds us that real change doesn't come from grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. It comes from the daily choice to treat each person we encounter with the dignity and respect that every human being deserves. It comes from having the courage to speak up when we witness injustice, and the wisdom to respond with grace when others fail to meet our expectations. In a world that often seems divided by wealth, status, and privilege, Dorothy Williams showed us that our common humanity is more powerful than any of these artificial barriers. She proved that kindness is not weakness, that humility is not humiliation, and that treating others well is not just morally right, but practically effective. Most importantly, she demonstrated that each of us has the power to make a difference, regardless of our circumstances or position in life. We all have the ability to choose kindness over cruelty, understanding over judgment, and inclusion over exclusion. The question is not whether we will be given opportunities to make these choices. The question is whether we will recognize these opportunities when they come, and whether we will have the courage to choose correctly when the moment arrives. Dorothy Williams chose correctly, and in doing so she changed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone she encountered. That is the true definition of success, and the ultimate measure of a life well lived. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button right now. Subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss another billionaire butler story. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers around the world. The Billionaire Butler will return with more stories that reveal the true character of humanity. Until then, remember that you have the power to choose kindness over cruelty and respect over judgment.